Okay. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining. We're going to give it a couple minutes here to let folks get in and get settled before we get started with the content. The chat is turned on. Say hi to us. Let us know where you're calling in from. So it's good to see some messages. One note of housekeeping for those who are joining now, the chat will default to send messages only to hosts and panelists, which means that only Boss and I can see them. You'll want to change that to everyone so that everyone can see your messages, questions, comments, anything like that. Someone from Toronto. Were you at last year's Airflow Summit?
Nice.
We'll have a note about this year's Airflow Summit, which is sadly not in Toronto again. Okay.
Leon, Holland. A late meeting, late call.
Yeah, lots of folks in different time zones. For people just joining us, we're going to give it maybe one more minute here before we go ahead and get started. We're still getting lots of people filtering in here. Someone from Brazil. There's I don't know where in Brazil you are. It's a big country. There's a Sao Paulo meetup, which I think is the first one coming up in a couple weeks. So that's exciting. We'll throw a link to that in the chat in case that happens to be where in Brazil. Okay, we're at 2 after. So Baz, if you want to pull up the slides,
Sure.
We'll go ahead and get started going through community stuff here. All right, well, folks, I know we still have some people joining, so welcome. I'm going to kick us off and go through a couple of community updates, just about things that are going on in the Airflow project before we dive into the content today. So if this is your first webinar with us, welcome. We're very happy to have you. If you are a repeat attendee, it's great to have you back. Always want to start with some community events that are going on in Airflow, lots of things happening all over the world. So including some in-person meetups that are coming up next week, both in the Bay Area, that's going to be at our office at Astronomer, and in New York City, also at our office, our Astronomer office. So I will throw links to both of those things in the chat. I also already threw a link to a meetup that's coming up in Brazil that I don't have on here. That's on March 7th in Sao Paulo. So I saw a couple folks in the chat say that they were from Brazil. If you have not already, definitely join the Airflow Slack. That is a great way to connect with the Airflow community, get help when you need it. You can connect with us there. I will throw links to that in the chat as well. And then our content spotlight for this week is a couple of other related best practices content, not the same best practices that we're going to be talking about today, but more on the MLOps side. We've got a new written guide for that. As well as we will be giving a talk at the Comp42 Python conference next week. That is virtual, so anybody can join. And that is going to be about testing Airflow, so sort of tangentially related to what we're talking about today. So again, I'll throw links to all of that stuff in the chat in just a minute here. And if we go to the next slide. Airflow Summit, your next very exciting announcement. The dates and the location of the summit are now live. It's going to be happening in September in San Francisco this year. You can sign up for updates at the Airflow Summit website. I'll throw links to that in the chat. The call for proposals for talks and workshops is also open. So if you're interested in speaking about your use of Airflow, obviously love to have you here. So that will be open for, I believe, another month or so, or until sometime in early April. So definitely a great time to start thinking about that. And especially if you are outside of the US and interested in joining, the Airflow Summit, now is a great time to start planning for that and getting visas and things like that. So, and then next slide. My final update for today is for everybody who joins. We have who joined us today. We have a special offer for a free Airflow certification exam code. Again, I'll throw this in the chat so you don't have to worry about copying it down from the slide. But if you're newer to Airflow, this is a great way to learn. All of the preparation courses are free, and then you can take the exam for free. It's a great thing to put on your resume. We also have a free trial of Astro, which is our managed service for Airflow. Boss is going to be talking a lot about that today. So if you're interested in trying out anything that he shows, we have a free trial there. And I will, again, throw the link to that in the chat. Okay, next slide. So I think that's all my community updates. A couple of notes of housekeeping for folks for some frequently asked questions before we dive in. Again, chat is turned on, as you have seen. Please ask questions. I will be answering anything I can as Boss goes through, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So you can use Zoom's Q&A feature or throw any comments or questions in the chat. We will get those answered for you. This is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording afterwards. So if you want to watch again, share with your colleagues, you need to step away for a minute, it's all good. You will have all of that. So super excited for the content today. In the Airflow survey that was done at the end of last year, by far and away the most requested topic for things like this was more best practices content. So we are here to support you with that. And today we're going to be talking about best practices for managing Airflow across multiple teams. We have one of the authorities himself here to talk about it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Boss, who's going to go through the content.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Kenton. So, getting some pop-up screen. Okay, so tonight or this morning, this evening, from wherever you're calling in, want to talk a little bit about managing Airflow across multiple teams. First, a little bit about me. I'm a staff architect at Astronomer, working there for the last 2.5 years or so, with various customers from small to large, from simple to complex, but lately a lot of the very largest customers and very largest Airflow installations. So that means typically tens, sometimes hundreds of Airflow instances, and we're dealing a lot with how to properly set it up, structure that, organize it, manage it. So tonight I hope to show you some best practices, how to do that without Astro, but also how we help you out with Astro in organizing many Airflow instances. You might know me from this book. I'm the co-author of the book Data Pipelines with Apache Airflow, and also a committer on the Apache Airflow project. So whenever I find spare time, I enjoy working on open source software and specifically Airflow. So with that, today I want to cover 3 topics. So starting with automation, I'll show you different bits and pieces of automation, what you can automate. Then we'll go into reporting. So that goes a little bit into collecting data, how you can visualize the data, what kind of questions you might want to think about and want to get answered. And then lastly, we'll go a little bit into alerting. So once you have some data to report on, you might want to think about alerting and respond in a proactive way about on events that happen on your platform. So with that, okay. So let's say you're just starting out with Airflow, not thinking big at the moment, but let's say you're just starting out and the typical use case looks like this. So you have one development team in your organization and they're responsible for servicing the customers of that organization. But it's just one development team. And generally, when you're starting out fresh with Airflow, that development team is responsible for everything around Airflow. So they manage Airflow, they install Airflow, they manage Airflow, they write data pipelines, they do everything around Airflow. But once you start growing, typically more people get added or more development teams get added, the number of customers starts growing. But organizationally, it's still kind of the same, but we just see more teams being responsible for the same thing. So one development team might set up one Airflow instance and maintain that, and the second development team can set up their Airflow instance and be responsible for maintaining that. And they each have their own group of customers that they report to and deliver some sort of features or data to. But once you start growing beyond, let's say, a handful of teams, you typically start seeing some organizational changes as well. So you get more and more development teams, so more and more people that want to write Airflow data pipelines and use Airflow. These development teams sometimes not only develop features or pipelines or reports or whatever for their customers, but sometimes they're also internal development teams that only deliver features to other internal teams. But you also start seeing different roles in a platform like this. So typically we see the addition of a so-called platform team who are responsible for developing an internal platform, so tooling that people can work on, and that enables the development teams to really focus on delivering output, so writing data pipelines that deliver, as said, reports or features, something else to their customers. But the development teams are generally not responsible anymore for setting up and maintaining Airflow. They, in an ideal situation, they go to their platform team and say, hey, I want to start writing Airflow. And within 5 minutes, they get a Airflow instance and can get started. That's generally what a platform team is responsible for ensuring that the development teams can work as efficiently as possible. And alongside that, you typically have various roles. You often find a security person that is concerned around security. Do we do everything in a secure way? Is everything according to the company security policies? And we also often see somebody who is concerned about costs. So a billing admin would like to know, for example, is the operational cost of a platform, is that within bounds? Can I set some sort of controls on the cost or alerts on the cost? Or can I maybe charge or budget a certain amount of dollars for every team for whatever resources they're using? So those are some questions that a billing admin would be concerned about. So with that, let's go into how can we automate certain things around Airflow. And why would you even automate it in the first place? If you're just starting out small, it's very often a lot faster and easier to click on a button and you get things up and running. But very quickly, you'll probably find that clicking a button repeatedly is not very fun. And it's also a bit error prone. If you have a lot of things to configure, so let's say there's 20 configuration items to configure in your Airflow or maybe some other tool that you're leveraging. It can be very error prone to repeat that same process multiple times to fill out every 20 the options for those 20 checkboxes that you need for creating a new instance of maybe Airflow or maybe some other tool, and making sure that you repeat that same process correctly every single time that you create a new instance. So with automation, you generally define everything as code, and with the click of a button, you then create resources according to what's defined in the code instead of having to manually select things over and over again. Automation can also besides just creating resources or managing resources, provide automation or tooling to help automate complex tasks. For example, with migration projects, we often find ourselves writing tooling to automate repetitive tasks. For example, in a lot of Airflow 1 to 2 migrations, you have change import. And if you have to repeat the same code change a lot of times, sometimes it's easier to write a script to do that automatically. Writing a script will take some time, of course. So in that time, maybe you can make the same code change 10 times. But if you have to make the same code change 1,000 times, it's very often much more time efficient and more fun sometimes to automate a complex task. So that's why you would want to do automation. And if we're thinking about setting up Airflow, so installing, provisioning Airflow, the standard way to do that with open source Airflow is through Helm. Helm is a deployment manager on Kubernetes, and Airflow comes with a Helm chart to automatically provision Airflow. So the way you do that is with one or sometimes two commands. First, you have to install the Airflow Helm chart, and then you define a file, typically called values.yaml. And with this Helm values.yaml, you run Helm install on your Kubernetes cluster, and automatically provisions all the bits and pieces that together form Airflow. So that means the Airflow scheduler, Airflow web server. If desired, you can also spin up the Postgres database. You can, in this values YAML, you would define all your configuration. So let's say you want a salary executor, and then that's a toggle. And with the Helm chart, you then also provision the workers and Flower, for example. So, and this makes it one, easy to spin up, but also makes it a repeatable process. So let's say you have one Airflow that you created for Helm, and now you want more of the same, then you just take the same script and can run Helm again to provision a second or third or whatever instance of this same cluster. Now, at Astronomer, we also provide some ways to automate creation and management of resources. We have recently introduced a REST API. We have public documentation on our website, and also it's according to the Open API spec, so you can import this into your, for example, a Postman or a Swagger, and play around with some requests. And how we then use the REST API within Astronomer is for managing, creating resources on the Astronomer platform. So in Astronomer terminology, a Airflow instance is a deployment, and a workspace is essentially a collection of Airflow instances. And on the workspace level, you can then define, for example, permissions, connections, variables. This provides you an easy way to distribute these kind of settings to multiple Airflow instances. And then one level higher, we have an organization that's your overarching collection of all your workspaces and deployments. So getting back to the automation part, say you have one team running on Astronomer and now want to onboard two more teams. The not best practice or the bad practice is to manually copy paste settings from one deployment and create a new deployment from all the copied settings manually through the user interface. It can be convenient if you're just starting out, but best practice is always running a script with all the settings included. It's faster because you can just click a button and create multiple resources such as workspace and deployment, and it ensures consistency in whatever resources you're creating. We also provide some additional tooling around upgrades in this case. So if you're familiar with upgrading Airflow, it can be a little bit of a challenge every now and then. So Airflow on average releases a new minor version every 3 months or so. And following the SemVer standard, that shouldn't be a problem, right? So we get new releases from, say, 2.7, Airflow 2.7 to Airflow 2.8. According to SemVer, that shouldn't include a breaking change. But the challenge with Airflow is often that the Apache Airflow package contains lots of dependencies, for example, providers packages, but also other packages that those provider packages then depend on. And when you just upgrade Airflow and you don't really pin every single dependency, then you might get a newer version of that dependent package, which could include a new major version. And a new major version, according to the SemVer standard, could include a breaking change. So actually, when you want to upgrade to a new Airflow version, very often you find yourself checking for breaking changes in dependent packages, and that can be a lot of work because, yeah, sometimes there's tens or hundreds of dependent packages. One way to do that we often see is people have a development deployment. They upgrade the development deployment to the latest version, and then run all their devs, see if they work, keep the fingers crossed, and go from there. It's unfortunately not a we don't have a golden answer at this very moment. It's quite hard to it's a kind of a PhD project to figure out a good way how to do this, but we do provide some tooling at this very moment to ease that process of upgrading. So with this command, Astro dev upgrade test, and you can optionally define a specific Airflow version. So in this case, Airflow version 2.8.1. And what this will do is it will build a Docker image for your current version. So let's say that's 2.7.3. And then for your specified version, it will also build a Docker image. So you have 2 Docker images with your project with 2 different versions. The Astro CLI will then run pip freeze in both containers. That will fetch all the packages, so the Python packages that are installed in those 2 containers and their versions, and then essentially match those 2 together to see where changes happened. So that's either patch changes, minor changes, or major version changes. And then I'll show you that in a little bit. With that list, you can decide where you need to check for potential breaking changes. Another thing when developing at maybe a bit larger scale that we often find is that people would like to revert a code deployment. It's very common that you, for example, find a bug in new code. We all try to be 100% perfect in our job, but unfortunately, everybody's a human, and we all, or at least I also make errors. So sometimes you would want to undo a change, or have another reason, want to change to a prior version of Airflow, for example. So one way to do that is through a git revert commit. And git revert is essentially saying, I have my Git timeline with a bunch of changes, and I go back to some prior change that creates a new commit, and you just redeploy those code changes. Can be an option in some cases. but especially with version changes, that often comes with database migrations. So it might not be an option in every scenario. What you can also do is, if you're leveraging Docker, is that you take a previous Docker image tag and redeploy with that. But that also faces the same challenge of database migrations. So with Astronomer, or actually since Airflow 2.3 from the top of my head, we have a Airflow DB upgrade and downgrade command, and that enables you with the Airflow CLI to do upgrades and downgrades using the Airflow CLI. And we built this into the Astronomer UI. So with the click of a button, you can roll back to a previous version of your code. In this screenshot, I hope it's readable, but in the bottom two rows, you see Astro runtime 9.10.0 based on Airflow 2.7.3. Then I made a code change to upgrade my Astro runtime or Airflow to Airflow 2.8.1. And then, yeah, at this point in time, hey, I discovered a bug, or I want to test something. So I clicked the deploy button, and that rolled me back to this Airflow version 2.7.3, and it did the database migration in one go. So with click of a button. So that kind of automation can help you manage these kind of complex tasks. One other thing to think about when you're running Airflow at a bit larger scale is how to deal with connections and variables. So when you're just starting out, most people leverage the Airflow metastore for that. So you would go to, in the Airflow interface, you would go to admin, connections, create a new connection. And that means in the Airflow database, you then store those details of that connection. And that works perfectly fine for one single Airflow instance. Now, when you start automating, people tend to quickly use environment variables instead. So you can create an Airflow connection through an environment variable with the prefix Airflow _con_, and mycon will then be the ID of your connection. And the same works for variables. So you can define an environment variable with the prefix Airflow _var_, and then my var will be the ID of your variable. And this helps a lot with automation if you're deploying through sometimes Docker Compose, sometimes Kubernetes. This can help get connections and variables deployed. But when you start scaling out to multiple Airflow instances or deployments, as they're called in Astronomer, this poses a challenge because both the Airflow metastore and environment variables, they only work within one Airflow. And the next step from there is to use a so-called secrets backend. And a secrets backend is a system dedicated for storing secrets. And Airflow can connect to such a system. And you then store your secrets, so connections and variables in that system. And at runtime, when you run a task that, for example, needs a connection, it would reach out to one of these secrets backends that you configured, for example, HashiCorp Vault, and say, give me connection with my ID top secret, and then you can use that in your deployment. And when you create a new deployment, you just configure the same secret backend, and you automatically get access to all these secrets. So it's a good practice because secrets will be defined in only one place instead of scattering them over multiple deployments. So from a security perspective, that's desirable, and these systems tend to have nice features such as, for example, secret rotation, which make it easier for managing secrets. So I showed three options for managing secrets, the Airflow metastore, environment variables, and secrets backend. So just for reference, when you fetch a connection or a variable in Airflow, Airflow searches for your value, for your key, in this order: in the secrets backend first, if you've configured one, then environment variables, and then lastly the Airflow metastore. And wherever it finds your secrets first, it will take that value. So if you have defined a connection in an environment variable, but also the metastore, then it will select it from the environment variable. If it finds it first in the secrets backend, then it will take it from there. With Astronomer, we found that some customers are, for example, hesitant to set up a secrets backend for various reasons. So we recently introduced a new feature called environments, and currently that supports connections, and that allows you to define connections within the Astronomer interface. So this works on a workspace level, as you can see here, and that allows you to share connections between all the deployments in your workspace. So we take the same, show the same Airflow hierarchy again. You have an organization. Within that organization, you have workspaces. Typically, people organize that per team or per environment. So, for example, you would have one workspace for the finance team. And then you can create connections within that finance team and share with all the deployments that that workspace contains. So I've done quite a bit of talking. Let me quickly demonstrate a couple of these things of what I just showed. So starting with automation. So as I said, we have a REST API. You find it under Astro API, and then there is a reference to two APIs. I'll show a quick demonstration of the platform API, and that allows you to create, read, update, delete a couple of resources on the Astronomer platform, such as workspaces and deployments. So one thing you require to manage these resources is a organization token. So it's an API token. It's like a secret bit of information that authenticates with Astronomer. And then once you have that set up, you can use the REST API. I'll show you how to create a workspace, and within that workspace, create two deployments. So go there, we zoom in a little bit. Just for demonstration purposes, I created a bare minimum script, which just creates a workspace at first. So through the Astronomer API, this endpoint, we create a workspace. We'll say create a workspace. It will return the workspace ID. And then within that workspace ID, we'll create two deployments. And here you can see all the settings for this deployment. So this is why you want automation, because all the settings are defined here in code. And you don't have to manually go into the interface, click new deployment, and manually click together all these settings anymore. So if I run this script, demo, it'll say created workspace, and it created a deployment with this ID and a deployment with that ID. I quickly have to make a switch here. There's a new workspace called demo, 2 deployments, and you see they're currently being created. So let's say you have multiple teams within your organization and you plan on onboarding them. Then with the click of a button, you can now create resources for the REST API. And let's say the team says, I want Airflow, then within a matter of minutes, you can get them up and running. I also showed upgrades, how to do that, or how to at least help with the process. So if we go here, you'll see a lot of text on the screen, but the important command is Astro dev upgrade test. Running it will take like a minute or 2, so I won't do that for the demo, but yeah, it will, like I said, build 2 Docker images for both versions. And the important thing is that it will give you a file. And in that file, you can find the major updates between those 2 Airflow versions. So if you don't pin, for example, URL lib 3, in Airflow 273, you get this version. In Airflow 281, you get this version. And since that's a major version change, so from 1 to 2 here, that means there can be breaking changes. So if you're using URL lib 3 in your code, you might want to check that and see if there's a potential for any breaking changes in your code. Rollbacks I also covered. So let me switch workspaces again. Go to deployments. There is in Astronomer a deploy history tab here that shows me every single deployment or release of code I did to this deployment. As I showed here, I can add a description, and then you see the Astronomer runtime and corresponding Airflow version. Let's say I'm not happy with some code change or some Airflow version. I click the deploy button. I need to give a description. So let's say demo. I have to confirm that I'm absolutely sure. And it will initiate a new deploy for this new or prior code change and version that I was running. And in terms of connections, also show that we have an environment tab here. Under connections, we can define connections from the Astronomer interface, just like you can in Airflow. So here I can create, for example, an AWS connection. Let's give it some random name. And if I want, I can link it to all my deployments. So if I select yes, I've now created a connection, and it's linking this to my 2 deployments within this workspace. So you don't have to create 2 separate connections, but you can create one and just say, like, I work in this deployment and that deployment. Now, let's say you set up the basics of your platform, you automated some things, you can, you're getting up and running. Now, very often people want to understand what's going on, right, on the platform. As the platform started growing, people want to make sure that everything's all right now, but also want to understand the growth of the platform. So a common question is, for example, how many DAGs are we running? Or how many tasks are we running? Or did we run in the last month? So it's important to collect that data and make that available in dashboards or reports. Also, people want to understand right now if everything is working correctly. So common questions are, for example, how much CPU is being used, or is there any machine where the CPU is 100% maxed out? Other questions could be, are all the versions supported, or is there somebody running an Airflow instance which is very outdated and might contain some security risks? For a billing administrator, cost is always important topic. So if we can show the cost of a platform, that's always very insightful to a billing admin. So if we disregard Astronomer and just look at open source Airflow, you typically collect three things from Airflow. So first is information in the database. There's a state, every task that runs, every button that you click, typically does something in the database, which is typically Postgres or MySQL. Additionally, you can collect logs. A very common tool to store those logs and collect those logs is Prometheus. But there's a bunch of other log or metric collection tools out there. And lastly, logs. Logs tell you, hey, on this line of code, this happened, on that line of code, that happened. So those are all also very important to trace down issues, but also understand the status of your platform. And on the right, I displayed Grafana. It's a dashboarding tool, but also besides Grafana, there are tons of other alternatives to that. But make sure for convenience purposes to try to stick to one tool. It's always good to get some to have one standard within your organization. A couple of standard questions that people probably want to ask when you have dashboards and reporting set up. So people want to understand the current status of the system. For example, what's the CPU usage in the last 30 minutes or last 5 minutes to understand if the current status of the platform is all right. For reporting purposes, the time span is typically a lot longer. So people typically look over weeks, months, sometimes years time. And they want to understand questions like how many tasks did we run, or which teams are making the most use of Apache Airflow. Reporting can be very useful for migration efforts as well. A common use case is, for example, company or a team implemented a custom version of a standard operator. So let's say the Python operator, the team wanted to run a custom version of that. So my core Python operator, and then want to check if there's no more workflows or teams using the standard Python operator. So if you have any sort of reporting on that part, then that's always incredibly helpful. And again, on the cost, common question is how much does it cost, or how much money is every team spending on this platform? Within Astronomer, we do provide, since recently, some dashboards out of the box to get all these questions answered. So under organizations, under your organization, under organization settings, we now have a dashboard button. As you can see, it's currently in preview. And in these dashboards, I'll cover them in a second and show you some of these questions that some of these example questions, how they can be answered with these dashboards. So besides just showing plain information, you typically also want alerting on your platform. This helps a proactive response when anything happens. On the short term, people typically want to get questions answered to answer if everything is all right now. So if Airflow goes down, if the scheduler goes down, if tasks are queuing up, you want to know it right now. There's also longer term questions that you might want to get answered. Common question is, or common use case is, an organization is only wants to run long-term supported Astronomer runtimes. Those are the Astronomer runtimes with 18 months of support instead of the standard 6. So you could alert if somebody created an Airflow deployment with a non-LTS runtime. And lastly, people always want to bring their own tools. In the end, everything I say always boils down to an Excel sheet. So yeah, having some way to export raw data and have people play with that data in their own tool of choice is always incredibly helpful. Otherwise, yeah, it can feel a little bit restricting if you only offer out of the box dashboards. So since I mentioned Grafana, that has some export functionality. Pretty much every tool typically does that in the dashboards that I'll show in a second. We also offer some export functionality to CSV, Excel, JSON, etc., etc. And if you offer that functionality in your platform, it enables people to dig in and understand certain, some of their questions. So let me quickly make a switch here. So we go to the dashboards in Astronomer. At the moment, we have 5 dashboards out of the box, which you see in the tabs at the bottom here. I'm not going to cover them all, but yeah, you see some fancy graphs here, and here we have some insights in a bit more raw data. What I wanted to highlight here is this can be incredibly helpful to identify, for example, out of date or unsupported Astronomer runtime versions. So you see some yellow and red here, where yellow means the Astronomer runtime is set to reach end of maintenance in the next 6 months. So it's something you probably want to look closely at. And red means one deployment is currently unsupported. So that's something, you probably don't want to have and might want to consider upgrading. One additional thing I want to point out in these dashboards is it's always incredibly helpful to have an understanding of what your platform costs you and if there's an opportunity, for example, to reduce costs in some way or another. So we have a cost breakdown dashboard where you over here see some summary costs, but at the bottom, if we scroll down, we can break this down per workspace, per deployment, so Airflow instance, and then within that deployment also per resource that is used within that Airflow instance. So this helps you understand a bit what cost you are consuming, but sometimes there's a chargeback strategy in place within your company where teams get allocated a budget, and then you can say, hey, you get a budget of this much dollars, and based on these numbers, you can charge it back. In terms of alerting, we also offer some alerting in the dashboards. Oh, sorry, go back. Okay. Organization settings, dashboards. Do I have to log in, log out? Probably have to log out and log in again. So looking at the time, I will skip this for the time being. Leave some time for questions. One last topic I want to quickly touch upon is workspace-level alerting. So alerting, as I said, helps give you a proactive response when something happens. To say, yeah, could be a good reason. So saying the report is ready, it's an important report, you might want to check it out straight away, but also in a bad situation like a critical pipeline has failed. So on a small scale, so within DAG code, your Airflow DAG code, you can define callbacks. These are functions that you would set on a task or a DAG level, and this function can run arbitrary Python code. So common use cases are sending an email or sending a message to your paging system like Pager or Duty. But when you start growing larger and larger in scale, you might want to do this over multiple Airflow instances. So again, Prometheus, common metrics collection system, and Prometheus also offers a tool called the Alert Manager. And this is a tool that allows you to define certain criteria for setting up alerts, such as there are no more open pool slots or tasks are stuck in queue. So certain conditions that you can measure through metrics, and then send out an alert to whatever configured system there is, and it enables you to act on that immediately. Within Astronomer, we also offer some built-in alerts. When you click on this button, we currently offer 4 different types of alerts. So in case something failed, a DAG failed, in case DAG succeeded, task duration is essentially what is SLAs in Airflow. So whenever a task is meant to take no longer than an hour, and it happens to take longer than that, then you can send out an alert. Sorry, that's absolute time, and task duration is if a task takes longer than it's typically does. So that's essentially the execution timeout in Airflow. You can also send out an alert. In case of any of those conditions are true, you can configure a channel. So let's say an email, and then send out an email to notify of that condition. And the nice thing about that in Astronomer is that it works over multiple deployments. So you can have, for example, in your workspace, a production deployment and a staging deployment. You have to define only a single alert, and it works on those 2 deployments automatically. So to summarize, number 1 is start with automation. I think as soon as possible. If it's just one Airflow instance you have, sometimes it feels easier to click things together manually by hand. But for consistency and reproducibility reasons, it's very practical to automate everything you do. So define your system in code. Next, once you start growing with multiple Airflow instances, you want to understand what's going on. You can do that through dashboarding and reporting, both for historical purposes, but also for planning ahead. So to say, we want to scale out to double the size. Will our current cluster hold that, or should we add more resources? And in terms of alerting, it enables a proactive response to things that you should act upon right now and reduce the time to prepare. And with that, I'll open up the floor for any last questions.
Yeah, thanks for going through that, Bas. Lots of great content there. I threw all these links in the chat, so don't worry about
Okay.
the slide. We do have a couple of questions that I haven't answered yet. Several people are asking about, will we have a Terraform provider or something similar for managing deployments? That's a popular question.
I was expecting that. Yeah, I wish I could tell you it's coming out very soon. So it's definitely on our radar. I can't give any mention any roadmap or give any estimates about it right now, but it's definitely a highly requested feature. I'm well aware of that.
Yep, I think we can, yeah, definitely say that you folks here are not the first to have requested it. So we do take that feedback seriously. Unfortunately, Boss and I are not the people who control the roadmap, Astronomer. So, yeah, great question. Let's take a couple of questions about secrets backends, and how you would recommend doing that. So if you can only connect one secrets backend for a deployment, kind of how would you recommend managing if you have multiple teams that are using the same deployment, or a way of isolating certain secrets? Kind of how do you think about managing that?
Yeah. Let me quickly go to the Airflow docs. Secrets backend. So you can typically do this through prefixing your setting a prefix in the secret backend configuration. Let's see if I can quickly find an example. So you can, of course, I can't quickly find the thing I was looking for, but you would here in the backend quarks, you configure a what's called search path, and it's essentially a prefix to say like, okay, this secret with this given prefix should be searched for the connection ID that I provide in my code, and you can segregate secrets by putting them in different prefixes and configuring different Airflow deployments or instances with different prefixes. So one deployment goes to a prefix, for example, team A, and the other deployment sets a prefix for team B, and then that way they search in different namespaces or prefixes within a secret backend.
Yeah, awesome. And I think maybe a related question, you wondering about in terms of the order of precedence that Airflow uses, secrets backend is first, which means that if you have one set up, it's going to look there first, and there's no way of overriding that behavior. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's always.
Yep.
Yeah, this is the standard Airflow way. It will search these three systems, and wherever it finds your secret first, it will use that and return it.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. Is there a way to see the memory consumption of individual tasks? So if you're looking to kind of isolate any memory related issues on a specific worker, what are your recommendations for doing that?
Yeah, tricky question.
Yeah.
So on Kubernetes, it's somewhat doable to observe that. Depending on depends a bit on the infrastructure that you're running on. If you're running on say bare metal VMs and you installed Celery workers on there, I don't believe Celery exposes that on a task level. You can use Flower to get some insights into what Celery is running, but it doesn't say that on a task level. Airflow itself, unfortunately, also doesn't gather that data. So you would really have to monitor the underlying system that you're running on and fetch the metrics from there, if possible.
Awesome. Well, thanks for going through that. Folks, we are out of time, so we really appreciate all of you joining. I just threw a link to our free Astro trial in the chat. So heard from lots of customers today, which is great to see all on a webinar. If you are not an Astro customer and you're interested in trying out any of the stuff that Bas demoed today, you can use that free trial link there. Otherwise, again, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks to Boss for going through this content very late in the day for you. So we appreciate you staying on in your evening. And yeah, we hope to see you all again soon, and have a great rest of your day.
Have
Bye.
a great day.